Cool. All right. Hey, everyone. So this is the sig-auth meeting for June 24th, 2020. We had a light agenda, and now there's more stuff in it now. So let's see. We got Jack. Did you want to go first?
Yeah, can everyone hear me?
Yes, sir.
Good. Yeah, I'm just saying hello. Sorry I've not been around for a while, but my life has been in some turmoil, and I'm now at Apple. So my affiliation's changed, and I'm figuring out the open source stuff. It sounds like I can keep doing the kind of pre-existing things I'm doing, even though they're not necessarily related to my work. So I'll figure that out over the coming weeks and hopefully finish up this KEP finally. Thanks.
Cool. Congrats.
Thank you.
I don't. Paula, are you here? You have a sec-comp operator. Want to show us? I don't see. Oh, I do. I do see a person. But you're muted and no camera.
Sorry, I lost. Did you just ask me to present? Sorry, I was without audio.
Yeah, so you're next on the list. You have a sec-comp operator.
Yes. So okay, can I share my screen, please?
Let me see if I can figure out how to do that in Zoom.
So it would be the PJBGF, yeah.
So I see you twice on the chat list.
Yeah, the problem is that one I'm joining to share and the other one for the audio is a bit of a problem here.
Let me stop sharing first. I think I have to do that. And then if I does that do something?
Let me see. Still disabled. Oh, let me see.
It says you will start video later. I don't know if that.
Okay, let me. So if I do this, let me see if I can share. Yeah, I still can't share my my screen. It says that host disabled participant screen sharing. I think it's working now.
Now try.
Awesome. Thank you. Let me just share desktop.
Don't zoom on my meeting, please.
Let me just get. Yeah, can you see my screen by any chance?
I see a black screen with a white mouse. Is that what I'm supposed to see?
Right, let me. Can you see now?
No.
Okay, let me try again. Share application. Yeah, there you go.
Yep.
Yeah, sorry guys. All right, so if I. Yeah, cool. So hello, it's Paulo here. Today I will be talking about sig-auth operator. We presented this as well to sig-auth twice now, so last month and again last week. Here are the handles of everyone that is working on this at the moment. So just before we get there, actually, so sig-auth is going to GA on 1.19. We work on that right now. So hopefully that will, get done. But still, there are quite a few points that we think are not great with the implementation. So we're kind of developing that off tree to make it easier for users to use. And these are some of the needs that we think we have across the community. So for example, custom sig-auth profiles need to be actually manually copied across all nodes. So, without that, you simply can't use custom sig-auth. And there's no in-memory representation of profiles. So, it's very hard for people to share a given profile and be able to deploy that easily. There is also a lack of a medium to share sig-auth profiles for non-workloads. So for example, if you have with work secured, and you want to use a sig-auth profile, you probably would have to create your own. It's hard for you to kind of create that and share and help other people to kind of contribute with the same profile. There's also a lack of metrics. It's hard to have the view of, you know, what part of your workload is using seccomp. Out of those, which ones are actually applied automatically, which ones is using like the default and so on. And ultimately, another thing is, you know, we think that is an operator would help guiding users to have a stronger security default. So we starting already with MVP. It's pretty much almost there. It's already synchronizing those in-memory profiles, which are configured on config maps across all nodes. So you can create a config map, and all the profiles you create inside of this config map will pretty much kind of sync that across all the nodes, and we'll also make sure that they have the correct ACLs to it. In the future, there is a lot of things we want to do as well. So we want to, you know, we store public seccomps there. So, you know, the idea is to start creating things for, you know, profiles for all sorts of components and help the community to not only contribute, but also to, you know, create new ones and make sure that we evolving that case. Automatically apply profiles to public containers. So for example, be able to create those profiles, and once you know you have a profile for a given workload, allow to automatically map them and execute that within your cluster. So, you know, if you have the profiles for cured, for example, and you deploy cured, although without a profile, the operator would, you know, automatically map those two things and apply that through a mutating admission controller. We also envisage having some sort of metrics. As I said before, you know, that there's quite a few things that would help security, no, actually cluster admins to have a better view on the security of the cluster. Another thing that's quite important as well is allow clusters to fail closed. So for example, at the moment, if in one of the nodes, the runtime doesn't support seccomp, or for whatever reason, you know, a given seccomp wouldn't be applied, let's say because it's using a different action that is not supported or whatever, the idea of the operator is to be able to actually not allow that pod to be executed at all within the given node. We also consider things like in-memory representation for profiles via CRD, so we can do better handling of, you know, invalid scenarios. So for example, if users are trying to create a profile that, you know, is not valid, or trying to delete a profile that is being used on, you know, running pods, then the operator would validate that and make sure that that wouldn't be the case. And just kind of the last point is pretty much to say that these and quite a few other points that we're thinking about extend to AppArmor as well. So what we're trying to do is make sure that this is up and running, working well for seccomp, and then once that is the case, we could pretty much extend that to AppArmor. Here's well, a mind map that we of things that we start thinking about. So as I said before, you know, like the in-memory representation, the syncing of files is something that, you know, of existing profile is something that we're considering. The idea of having seccomp feature aware. So for example, if your runtime doesn't support the log action, it would be able to kind of tell you in advance. And again, quite a few other things that we're kind of thinking for the future. So the key reason why we're presenting these and why we presented that to sig-auth as well is, well, one of the reasons is to get, you know, a buy-in for us to create a repo within Kubernetes SIGs, so we can actually benefit from the development ecosystem and also from community support. And also one thing that is very valuable for us is to get, well, help and ideas from anyone that is keen on seccomp and seccomp operator. So that would be all from me, really. Do you guys have any questions? Oh.
This all looks great. Thanks for sharing. I'm excited that you're working on this, and definitely +1 from me for a SIG repo. Although I do, I mentioned this on the chat. I do think that SIG node should be the primary SIG responsible.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that.
Do we have like an existing issue open for the request?
Yes, we do have an issue. I will share here as soon as I find it. But yes, we do have an issue created for the creation of that. So I'll share here if you guys can, comment on that or give your backing. That would be awesome.
Cool.
Awesome. So thank you very much.
Can you also drop your slides in the notes?
Yes, I will do that now. Thank you.
Thanks.
Cool. Let's see. All right, Jim. Since I still haven't figured out how to actually let you share your screen, I'm going to make you co-host temporarily.
Okay, sounds good.
All right, you should now be able to share your screen.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I'm sharing. Yeah, so hi everyone. Just wanted to, I think we presented a few weeks ago on what we were doing in the policy working group. This was related to, I think at that time we were talking more about creating a custom resource definition for violations. But since then, and receiving sort of incorporating feedback from the community, what Erica and I wanted to share today is just a quick update on that and get some thoughts and feedback. So we've extended that concept to have a common policy report. And the idea is just going to this document that's linked in the agenda. I'm not going to go through details, but the idea is to create a reusable type, which we can either have adapters from different policy tools, and there seem to be quite a lot of these now where different policy tools, I guess, addressing different concerns. But the idea would be to allow them to create a common report structure. So we've been working, there's folks from Red Hat, IBM, and then myself and a few other folks in the working group have been drafting this structure, which is in this document in terms of how we would be able to capture the reports in a common format. And of course, the advantage there being then through kubectl or any other common API tools, upstream management tools can do further processing, auditing, logging, and enrichment of these reports. So for that now, in our repo, we do have, there's a PR pending, which we are almost ready to merge. And, what it's pretty much, what this does today is it has the definitions. So we ended up using the code generation from the same thing as what KubeBuilder does. So in the policy report folder, in the types, basically we have defined a cluster-wide type as well as a namespace type. And this report, it kind of captures some of these common fields. And the idea, the next thing we want to do is populate some samples and then start looking at adapters for different tools. Some of the tools we have identified, I just listed them within the document. So let's finding the right tab. So some tools we're looking at: KubeBench, OPA Gatekeeper, Kyverno, Cloud Custodian, Starboard, which Liz had commented on here too, that's one of the new tools Aqua was working on, and then Falco potentially is another one which we could use. So either we'll look at creating adapters, or in some cases, the tools may natively support this output format. And I think there was Rackham. Maybe Erica, if you want to jump in and share a little bit more about what the IBM team is also doing with Rackham and what's proposed there.
Yeah, that project coming from the IBM Advanced Cluster Manager, which they're bringing into OpenShift with compliance, operator, and a few other compliance and policy related projects. So they have several kinds of kind of security and policy scanner, different types and they're helping us to develop this and would use that to report all of their kind of reports from their different scans. And I believe they also mentioned that there's other projects that other third-party providers who would also use this as their standard input into their reporting different types of policy-related reports and scans in Kubernetes.
So really just looking for any updated thoughts, feedback, from that, just again, validation that this seems like the right direction. And then I think the other thing that we wanted to discuss is once we have a few of these, at least policy tools, once we start creating samples and adapters, what else would we want to get done before this is more widely circulated, or if we, I don't know, like what would be the next logical step for something like this?
David, are you trying to say something? I think you came off mute for a second.
I was debating. I mean, this looks to me like a super useful thing that could be developed completely successfully outside of Cube, right?
Yeah, that's basically what we're doing. The thing that we're trying to use kind of Cube for is it's the coordination point of there's a lot of different tools and standards that are hoping to standardize on this. And we need it doesn't necessarily need to be, in the API server or anything, but at least having a definitive authoritative place for people to standardize on it is what we're looking for. If it has to stay in our SIG working group repo, that's okay, but we would like to be able to officially.
I'm just trying to figure out what it would add, right? Because you already have neutral governance there. It can be in, yeah, I mean, you already have neutral governance. It sounds like you've been pretty successful already. What would you be looking for?
So I think one thing, and this is just even from other working groups, this has come up, is with working groups, since there's no official code or I guess any official artifacts, right? The question is, is there any sort of graduation from that, or do they stay in prototype and proposal phase, right? That's really what we'd be looking for. And I mean, it can be used either way. So you're right? It's not preventing anyone from using it, but like our repo name, for example, is working group prototypes, right? We're not claiming to be anything official until we have the right validation and the sign off from a SIG.
So I guess I would ask is, like, theoretically, you could have like a different repo in Kubernetes 6 that was like for this subset of work that's like graduated out of prototypes. Is there some conceptual benefit to that versus, like, for example, making like a unique GitHub org that sort of houses this project and you sort of,
yeah,
that's where you anchor your community? I mean, I'm trying to relate it to like I guess, like, is there a reason for it to be in Kubernetes SIG when it's like done, or ready.
Yeah, to be clear, I don't object. I'm just looking at it saying, like, I don't think it ever makes it into KK. I don't know that it ever needs to be in Cube API. If we just need an officially sanctioned Kubernetes SIGs repo, that seems pretty reasonable, right? Somewhere where it can live after the working group goes away.
Yeah, that's all we're kind of asking is where do we officially point people to, you know, and expect people to be able to import in their, whether it's Go code or, you know, copy out CRD definition or whatever.
Do you have like an idea for a name?
I don't know that we've actually thought about it. We can take another 2 months to discuss it.
Yeah, I mean, I think I am pretty much in agreement with David. I don't feel strongly. I think it's fine. We would just need a name and issue, and we can go approve it, and it should be fine.
Yeah, and recall that if you want to be outside of x-kates.io, you're gonna want, and you want to instead be kates.io, you're gonna need to make it through an API review.
Yep.
Which again,
and that API
optional.
review document, I found there's some documentation about creating the enhancement and tagging it. Is there anything new that's missing from that official process?
I don't think so.
Great, thank you.
Okay. All right. Yeah, so we'll continue. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I just on the technical side, I had a question about this. Would this be a like synthetic resource that's generated on demand by an extension API server, or is this something that would be stored in etcd?
So it would be stored in etcd, and you know, one of the discussions we've had is how we aggregate and what would be some of the pros and cons in terms of sizing and scaling. So there is some flexibility in the definition for that. So the idea would be to allow, yeah, we weren't thinking of having like a API aggregation, but also like we had quite a lot of discussion on whether to follow like the standard spec and status structure. And for this, it seemed like it didn't make sense to. It was because it's an output from a policy engine, right? It's not really driving a controller. So yeah, to answer your question, yes, it would be in etcd. It would be, you know, and of course, like it would be accessible through kubectl and standard API calls. But the idea, what the definition itself leaves enough flexibility for either things to be aggregated at the cluster level, node level, namespace, or even like a workload, right? So we could have a report per workload if an engine chooses to output things in that manner.
I guess per workload, or like some of the kind of more fine-grained reports, this probably wouldn't be an issue. But I worry that, like for instance, aggregating at the cluster level, it seems like this could become really large, and I know we've had some problems with large resources in the past.
Yeah, we're aware of that. There's kind of the line we're trying to draw is this is a state of the cluster as it is. This is not for keeping your historical data. It's not for including lots of external non-Kubernetes kind of related policy information. Maybe you can kind of make a link to it or label if you need that. But this is specifically reporting about resources in the cluster at a current moment. So very specific of being able to link to real resources. It's a little bit unclear on how, because we know, like, you know, you can't have one report with listing every single pod. That's kind of one of our first issues to talk about in order to keep it a manageable size. It's kind of the best we can think of right now is selectors, which is, I don't know, iffy, but right. If people have, I know that this is a problem for other things as well, or either that or it's creating, you know, smaller reports that can be aggregated into a bigger report.
Right. Yeah, and a good example would be like if you take the CIS Kubernetes benchmarks, right? There's several ways to slice and dice those. Like you could do it per node from a reporting perspective, or you could do it based on category and node. So we'll have to do some iterations, and one of the first targets we had was Kubebench to try out, writing some adapters and outputting the report and seeing what works best. Also, not just for storage and flexibility, but also in terms of admins being able to view this and sort of use it appropriately. Another option for category, would be just to use categories like control plane and worker node and things like that, and make the smaller reports for each, but they would all fall into the same, and they would have some common labels that this is a CIS benchmark report.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure that was kind of like those issues were on your radar and something to think about. Sounds like you already thought about it, so that's great.
So just so we're clear, what do we feel like are the next steps? Is it like I guess I didn't understand for sure if you guys did want to be an xk.io or did not. Like I think I got the feeling that you want to make a PR to enhance this repo to get the API approved.
Yes, so there's more work we need to do. We just wanted to socialize this at this point, and I feel we should get 1 or 2 adapters under our belt first, and then once we have that, we'll come back with some more demos, and at that time we can figure out where this goes as a next step.
Cool. Thank you.
All right, thanks.
All right, I think I should probably share my screen again. Okay, I think this one was just an FYI. Jordan, did you want to mention it? Jordan, you're still on the call. Can't actually see the chats anymore.
Sorry. Yeah, this is the one of the last things that we had identified as being a blocker to being able to roll out bound service account tokens in a backwards compatible way. So the 3 things that we had identified were pod security policy constraints around different volume types. People might have set up their policies to allow secrets, and we would start injecting predicted volumes and not fit within those policies. The other 2 were rotation, clients that didn't expect to rotate, and file system permissions, and those have already been addressed. And so this is the last thing that would let us unblock rolling it out. Yay!
So how many years is it?
Courtesy FYI, because it does change the behavior of PSP, but we thought that it's probably worth it given PSP is on the way out.
Do we have a release note? Does this thing have a release note?
Good question.
No, it doesn't. I'm going to hold this
No,
PR
it should.
until
I will add one.
I'll add a release note.
Okay, I'll just let Jordan add the release note directly. Okay, cool. All right. I forget who on Slack brought this up. Is someone on the call to talk about this? I can talk about it some, but I'm trying to remember. Okay, I don't think anyone is, but I don't see like Mache and stuff on the call. But the general ask was, hey, want to move kubectl to staging and your auth code is in the way. What do I do with your auth code? Jordan, David, you probably have like the strongest opinions on this. Do you have a plan?
I don't object to goal. I had tried to actually do this and quickly got into several interfaces that were defined in the API server that were really thorny to move out. I'll drop a link to the branch that I had. So yeah, I agree with the goal. It wasn't a priority for me that trumped other things. So if someone wants to take that and run with it and chase down issues.
Can you describe where you would place the code that actually does the merging logic? Like, would you, where were you going to put it so that you could use it both in the Cube API server for the reconcile and in Cube control?
So the evaluation and the has already been switched to use external versioned RBAC objects. So that was the first step. I think you did that.
Yeah.
Having the role breakdown and the reconciliation code in its own component doesn't seem unreasonable to me. I had a hard time untangling the user info interface, and that was the main thorny bit that I ran into.
So just as a general principle, if other groups had similar kinds of desires, would we be creating a repo for each of them? Like what else would go in this repo? Is it like a repo for things Cube API server depends on and other people might want to use? Or is it a repo for RBAC? Or is it a repo for something else?
I had started with it being scoped to RBAC, but if we could come up with a coherent principle that would...
Well, so like it's a question for me, right? I worry about a proliferation of staging repos. And this does approach the limit of you know, what is the smallest thing you put in a repo and still make a repo?
Yeah. Because it's RBAC focused, it depends on API and API machinery. It doesn't seem to belong in client Go.
I'm not trying to push it somewhere like that, although you could probably do worse. I'm thinking more like, you know, is it something we would use for things like a shared dependency between the scheduler and the node as well, a scheduler and kubelet, right? Like they face similar problems. They have these helpers that they use with their API types. The helpers have a fair amount of code around them. Would we create?
So you're thinking more like a scheduling bucket and an auth bucket.
And I'm wondering whether you end up with a principle kind of like a library Go for Kubernetes, where like there are these things that build on top of our API, and our API repo doesn't allow function in it in order to keep the dependency chain small. But we've identified a need based on the level of the Kubernetes API to have helpers that match.
So kind of the rules would be you can depend on API and API machinery, and that's more or less it.
I would probably allow client Go.
Yeah. And then, yeah, I could see that as well. I hadn't gotten to
that. Would this repo have like an RBAC folder in it starting out? And that's where this shared bucket
I've seen requests from the scheduler team as well. So I might start with an RBAC or an auth folder.
Auth, authorization, RBAC, and then scheduling stuff. And then,
If you give the
Yep.
go ahead, I'll help create the first PR that makes the original sin, if you like.
Sorry, I think it's just because I'm not as familiar. Could you clarify who the you is that you're talking about? What is importing what?
David was asking what I thought. This is Jordan. David was asking what I thought of a repo that would hold utilities and helpers that build on top of the API types and maybe the client library.
Yeah, and that's a general use.
Shared
Someone else
use
has something else
between
they want to say.
components like the scheduler and the controller manager, or the scheduler and the API server, or kube control and the API server. We're sort of missing an intermediate bucket of higher level functions and helpers that don't require you to depend on the API server library, for example. Yeah, something like that seems like it could be reasonable. The rules around like what it was allowed to depend on would be worth sketching out and probably enforcing. Yeah, like I said, I hadn't gotten to that point. I hadn't even been able to extract it to a standalone repo. So
okay. If anyone else, like, I did direct it at Jordan, but if anyone else has comments on the, like, this is a terrible idea, or yeah, I've really needed that, I'm fine.
So from my personal experience, David, in OpenShift, I felt like that was relatively successful for us there. So.
It was. We had a really harsh enforcer.
Yeah, we wouldn't need even probably harsher because Cube is not just one company. So yeah, but I don't know. It seemed fine. I mean, I know you now have 2 library goes. You have the API server version, but it's fine. I don't think that really is bad.
All right. I'll think about that. We might actually be able to get the scheduler folks to make the first stab, and then the dependency chain on Cube, I believe, is already enforceable. At least long ago, I wrote one that enforced an explicit, full transitive closure check for KK or Cube repo dependencies.
For staging, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, that should hopefully still be there.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. Does anyone else have any thoughts and concerns? And at the highest level, this is basically we just need a third bucket to put stuff in and share it in some reasonable way, and we just need that third bucket not to grow indefinitely.
Yeah. The distinction here from, say, Kubernetes util is that this one is explicitly intended to depend upon. I think it's pretty reasonable to include the client. So Cube Client Go, Cube API, and Cube API Machinery. And the requirement for entering something like Kate's util is that you do not depend on those. So that's why this is a different bucket than the one we already have. And that dependency chain, Mo, is actually why OpenShift has 2. One of them is allowed to depend on KK and one of them is not.
Oh no, I remember this. Yeah. There's some pretty awful things in some of those things. Cool. Okay. I think we're good. Micah, did you want to talk about?
Yeah. So I kind of want to just bring this up just for discussion. Not that I'm not trying to make anything happen right away, but I kind of wanted to just sort of see where, where we're thinking in terms of Kubernetes auth in general, because I know that there's like some existing work being done on like the next item, the external TLS for kubelet. Yeah, so this had kind of originated. I just sort of briefly talked with Mo on Slack about like what would it take, and what are people's thoughts on adding something like request signing to Kubernetes? And by request signing, I mean like something like the Kubernetes or the AWS sig-auth, where you have like a sort of a public and a secret shared key, or even asymmetric key. So the current, for context, the current AWS sig-auth has a shared secret with the client and the authenticating server. But if there's also, you can do request signing without a shared secret. You can have asymmetric request signing. There's not, to my knowledge, there's not like an open source implementation of like AWS sig-auth on the server side for you to do your own thing yet. But I kind of wanted to just, yeah, I sort of wanted to poll and see what people thought about this.
Front proxy is what I know Mo's gonna hate me, maybe David as well. I would really like to make it easier for people to do stuff like Kerberos or V4 via front proxies. And I would definitely endorse a SIG subproject that lays some of the infrastructure for people to extend authentication using front proxies.
So ignoring the server side for a bit, I don't see how we do this client side.
That is a very good point.
Like I actually think like the aggregator fronts proxy today theoretically lets you do anything. So that we could just paper over that and say, use your custom aggregator front proxy for the server. What do you do on the client?
Yeah, it seems like something where we would need to figure out how we can enhance exec auth plugins to match what people who implement front proxies want to do. And I don't know exactly how to do that.
So I thought about it in that frame. I guess I don't know how well that would sort of pan out, because like when I was like fixing up the KEP for exec, I read over all the old stuff. Like one of the core things there was you don't want to run this external binary for every single request, right? And like if you actually want to do request signing, you should do it for every single request. And maybe the overhead isn't that bad. Maybe your binary is like not in Python or something, so it spins up real fast, does the signing, and then disappears, and maybe that's tolerable. But so that is an obvious sort of non-congruence with what the API is sort of designed to do. It's kind of designed for like, you know, the expiration within the response is basically like, hey, long-running client Go process, please cache this credential in memory for that long before you call me again for more stuff. Right, and never mind that we don't pass any of the request information to the exec plugin. So like, it's not really like it's good for this.
I agree that it's definitely not there today, but we could brainstorm to figure out whether it's something feasible. I'm not sure yet, but yeah, I agree that we're far from it today.
Is it feasible to do anything less than exposing kind of the full HTTP round tripper to an external thing? So it seems like if we want to support this in the...
So that's basically what I proposed as like a possible alternative to the whole external TLS thing that has been proposed. Is I feel like if we try to follow what like 1749 is asking from us, like offload partial bits of TLS signing, like we're signing up for like an incredible amount of work. And at that point, I would just like to offload the entire request and you do your magic, and your front proxy on the API server can maybe do its own magic, and at least you can do it today then. Theoretically, like if for some reason you wanted to use like tokens with this, you could maybe imagine like authentication could have more metadata about the actual request being performed. Like, so you could theoretically have a token that's only valid for like get pods or something. That's like, it's pretty limited as an extension point for the API server though, because once again, you can't you can't do like TLS-based signing on that because that's at least not obviously. So I think these two sort of topics are sort of related, and I'm kind of looking for the various leads and stuff to maybe respond to that issue, the enhancement PR, be like, hey, like, do we want like, first of all, like, I haven't gotten the sense from you guys if you want to do it at all, and I lean towards not doing it unless we can like figure out like how to control the infinite tech debt of a new gRPC client-side API. And
yeah, I think we should exhaust the possibility that we can do this sanely with an extension before we make the decision of whether to actually implement this in core.
Yeah. I think Ali had suggested like some kind of proxy-based approach on the client as well. I think that could be cool and feasible if we could get the UX nice. That might be
suggesting, yeah, an HTTP proxy environment variable, which unfortunately, causes weird stuff to happen for all of your HTTP clients on your machine. So if we did it in kubectl proxy and somehow magically made kubectl proxy do whatever it wanted with the request before sending it on to the real server, maybe that would let us do per cluster stuff nicely.
Kubeconfig now supports per cluster proxy URLs. Not from the environment.
Where is that in? I can look it up, I guess.
It's proxy URL field in kubeconfig.
Okay. Maybe that would work. Yeah, the only other bit I've seen there is like, how would you tell the proxy, like, for this cluster, use this CA to talk to the cluster itself? Like, it's like some random self-signed cert for this API server.
Yeah, and it's kind of scary to have something doing all authentication exposed even on a local environment.
Yeah.
Is this mostly just an alternative to client certificate authentication, or are there other, I guess I'm trying to understand the motivation here.
So you could, it would be like a further tightening of client cert if you use asymmetric, because what you would be saying is I have a private key and I'm using it for this connection, but also, by the way, you can only get pods. Like, you can't do anything else because that's what I signed it for. Right, so like, even if you back up and say you only have just tokens and not an asymmetric thing, you can imagine a token that was only good for get pods, and that's actually pretty cool because bearer tokens are not so great at not losing your identity across the wire. But okay, if you can send a token and it only works for like this one particular request, well, that's better.
Are you talking about like? Are you talking about a capabilities-based model?
Yeah, the request signing does effectively sort of become a capabilities-based model, which you're saying that I am making this request using this credential, and even though the credential represents me, the action I'm taking with that credential must also constrain the overall access. So obviously I have to be able to get pods, but I'm also saying that it can also only be used for getting pods.
And also time-based.
Yep.
And specific request if it's like a post.
I will say that when I hear you can only get pods or you can do this time-based, it does make me more sympathetic to Mike's claim of like, let's make it easy for you to build a front proxy. This is one way to do it, but I don't.
So no, I think the front proxy thing, I think, is perfectly fine for the server. I think that's actually relatively well supported. It's just how do I make kubectl help me, basically.
Right.
It's definitely not easy to do, I don't think, even though it is supported. There's some overhead.
There's been a lot of discussion and there's like no notes in the agenda. so we don't lose some of the things that were shared, can people like maybe summarize a couple of their points under the item? That would be super helpful to people looking at the agenda. Sorry. You can not either now or after the meeting, either way is fine. Thanks. Didn't mean to cut off discussion. Continue discussing.
Mike, I think, were you saying something?
No, I was just saying that, yeah, I'm not objecting to the server side, like front proxy thing. Like you and I talked about how Kubelet doesn't support front proxy today either, but it's a relatively simple change to add that if we wanted to. Same with like dynamic, like CA for Kubelet, pointing to a config map. But yeah, I think it is the client side that's the really tricky thing, because if like when EKS launched, we relied on the exec based auth, which was just, I think, in alpha, or just over 2 years ago, which, you know, as a new service, it worked okay. Like in terms of widespread adoption of client libraries, like we had a lot more, you know, requests for CA based auth when we got started, just because it hadn't filtered throughout most of the ecosystem, especially like other languages. I think if we were to go to a you know, sig-auth or front proxy thing on the kubeAPI server, like we'd want to make sure that there was at least 1 or 2 releases worth of a you know, client library support. Not, you know, kubectl client Go you know, at a bare minimum, so that we can, you know, add that to other languages as well.
Cool. Does anyone else have any comments and thoughts? I will write down some of my thoughts at the end of the meeting. I guess that sort of covers sort of the request signing bit. Mike, Jordan, David, do you guys have thoughts on this cap? I don't think anyone has really commented on it other than like Ali and myself. But I know like you know, it's way too late for 119 or anything, but they have a long time between now and like 120 freeze where they could work on this. And I would like to sort of give them some direction.
I had not looked at that at all.
I've also been pretty tied up with 119 stuff. I have somewhat similar questions about like whether externalizing that from within control is the right place to do it, or if pointing it at something which could do the signing, like manage the TLS connection to the server, would also be a better approach. So I think I have similar questions to the previous topic.
Okay, I guess if you guys get a chance, try to look at it. I think, you know, for the community members who have sort of proposed this, it would be nice for us to at least be able to say, like, at the very least, like, no, we just don't want to do this right now because it would add too much load on us as a SIG to maintain this thing forever. Cool. We got 3 minutes left. I don't think I will go through like any of the various issues. I think I'll just give folks 2-3 minutes back, unless anyone has anything. Cool. All right. Well, thank you guys. We'll see you in 2 weeks.